Well, welcome folks to the Pirate Round. This is Scarlet Raven and Captain Skultopus. They're my hosts today. I'm their guest on the Pirate Round. But today we think we're going to do an episode on a very important commercial commodity that was something that the pirates would come across a lot in their daily lives, and that would be tobacco, something we haven't really talked about on the show.
No, we haven't.
No, all the different trade goods that they had. You know, you had tobacco, you had sugar, you had coffee, you had even cocoa,
logwood,
spices, logwood,
indigo,
food, weaponry,
even human cargo, slaves.
Human cargo.
Slaves, yeah. It wasn't just gold and silver and gems,
and sugar,
so much
and whatever
stuff,
and rum.
Yeah, rum, and even iron bars, which is bringing from
copper.
England copper. Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
So. Yeah, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about tobacco because it wasn't just something that they would buy and sell. It was something that almost every sailor in that day would use as well. Mm-hmm. So it'd be good to talk about
as a personal use item.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Before we get too far, let's do a little toast here.
Captain Turner's got a toast here, and pour its way around. I'll take a little bit of that Jamaican Mountain Red there. There we go. Thank you so much.
So we want to thank everyone for watching this episode that we've got to come up here about tobacco and the trade goods. Now we want to say welcome everybody to friends not met, to friends that we've lost. Friends who aren't here, and
stab that subscribe button and support us here at the Pirate Round. We so dearly appreciate you as friends of our site, and we appreciate you being here and taking your time to watch our show.
Oh, and before we get too far, the second International Pirate Rendezvous 2020 in Europe, Zolpik, Germany, which has 3 stages: Mini Axe, Sea Banish Privateers, Pat Raskets, Storm Froon, many others have been.
Iron Maiden, Judas Priest,
Motorhead,
Ronnie Dio, Back from the Dead,
Hailstorm.
Hailstorm.
No, not on any of those others.
Patty and the Rats.
The first few at least, though.
Right.
Yeah, at least
the main language is English. August 7th, 8th, and 9th, Zolpik, Germany.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Welcome,
folks, to the Pirate Round.
All right.
Very good.
Now, Captain Turner, what have you brought us here in your treasure chest?
Well, I thought we'd talk a bit about tobacco, and if you had a plantation in the Americas back then, you almost were guaranteed to grow tobacco. Mm-hmm. At least on a portion, at least one plant of tobacco, because if you didn't grow it for your own use, then it was just too valuable of a commercial crop not to grow.
Right, which we'll get into some of that. Now, tobacco was actually introduced to Europeans October 15th, 1492. Mm-hmm. Now, if you know your dates, 1492.
Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
That's right. And it was Columbus who saw a bunch of the natives of the area in a canoe with water, food, and tobacco leaves. Mm-hmm.
Right. And he did some trading for some of those commodities, and when they gave him the tobacco, they didn't really know what to do with it. I think that they thought maybe they could brew it like tea, but it doesn't work for that, and they ended up throwing it overboard because they just figured it was worthless. But later they learned what it was for, and it became a very important commercial thing at that point.
Right, and now they found that the natives there would roll it up and smoke it, and they called it, what was it, a musket or something?
They called it a musket. A musket, which is interesting. It's a firearm, but it's also like a pipe. And the natives actually had it in a hollow wood tube, a long pipe that they would light it at one end, And the long tube allowed the smoke to be cooled and moderated.
Right.
It finally got to the other end, which is how we get the big giant pipes that people used.
The church steeple pipes that are so long like that.
Correct.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Now the natives typically didn't use it just for pleasure. They used it for ceremony and,
Right.
and things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
It wasn't just all the time like, it has become. Now, the Columbus took it back to Spain, and it spread through Spain around 1531. Just, went crazy. And then Sir Francis Drake brought it to England on his tour. And it was brought to, basically it was in wonder and great celebration. But what's funny here is tobacco was seen as a great thing, but the potato which she brought was considered a poisonous.
Right. And they're in the same family. They're both in the nightshade, which is, as you might know, the deadly nightshade family.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And tomatoes as well.
And then France got it around 1556, Portugal 1565, and then the rest of Europe around 1571. And they believed that there was a cure for it. Now, Anthony Shute in 1595 wrote a book called Tobacco, and he claimed that doctors were hiding the fact that it was a curative medicine to keep it hidden from the people. But what's interesting to find is that King James I, who actually was the first person who brought it into trade, found that it was actually a very bad thing, that it would leave soot in the lungs and was very unhealthy. But they formed laws, autonomous laws, and it was a great thing. Now Louis XIV actually put a monopoly on it, where he was making a lot of money for the government. Now both King James I and Louis XIV found that they could make a lot of money for the government by the sale of tobacco.
Now, like anything, tobacco with the nicotine component becomes highly addictive.
Right.
You have to wonder why humanity, as people, humans, have such a genetic predilection to addiction when it comes to some things as tobacco, opium, alcohol, alkaloids in general, like cocaine and something like
Things
that.
which really have no health benefit to you as a human being,
Yeah.
but your body begins to crave.
It begins to crave it. It causes a change on the mechanical and genetic level in your brain and your body to where you need it. And I can imagine there at the time in the 1500s when people had unrestrained use over and over and over again, that they would crave it more and more and more. And people have found out that in the end, people will crave it almost exclusively, even of food, that they'll crave the fix that they get from it.
Well, and especially, and we can get into that a little later too, but the way that the tobacco is used would affect how much of the nicotine you're getting and how addictive it would be.
True.
Smoking it in a pipe usually wasn't as much of a nicotine because you wouldn't inhale it into your lungs as much. But if you're smoking it as a cigarette, or if you're chewing it in your gums, then that would be a much higher dose of nicotine.
But it's quite interesting that as early as King James I found that it was actually addictive and unhealthy, and actually the Catholic Church deemed it to be a sin, but people ignored it because there were no biblical passages about it being a sin, so they just blew it off.
Yeah, and it was very popular in high society as well, so that made it very hard to make it something taboo.
Well, my old pot smoker friends used to say that, of course, a smoking pot is in the Bible, because there's a passage there in the Bible that says, you must smoke the weed that is given to you, as a sociable sense, which is complete BS. It's not in there. But that's how they would justify their use of marijuana. And I'm much think then, and people must have looked at that and thought, well, it's not in the Bible, you can't use this stuff. And it's like, well, no, there must be a passage in there somewhere that legitimizes the use of tobacco somewhere. But the church, of course, looked upon it as a vice. Almost, of course, drinking wasn't a vice, because people drank themselves practically to death back then because you couldn't have water. But it must have been seen as a vice, sort of like gambling, prostitution, something like that. So that's why they sought to put a control upon the use of it, so that people wouldn't just completely lose their senses, by succumbing to a complete and total addiction of nicotine.
Right. Now there were laws that were passed in the second half of the 1600s on the cultivation of it in the Americas.
Yeah.
But it was to ensure a steady and high quality supply that was coming in.
Right.
They didn't want just garbage tobacco.
Right.
It's quite a
There was
process.
a lot of that. Yeah.
It's quite a process to get good tobacco.
Right.
Which we'll probably hit upon.
It's not just about growing, but how it's prepared as
Right.
well.
Now
it's
there
rather
was,
complicated, isn't it?
there was a group of Indians or natives in Canada. I'll probably butcher this name. The Taonati Indians in southeastern Canada, which produced tobacco for sale in Europe by the French, and the French called them the tobacco people.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Right. Now there was also they tried to limit the consumption for medicinal purposes, which failed all over Europe.
Well, you're highly addicted, of course.
Right.
And interesting enough, in Turkey, in the Ottoman Empire, you could actually be beheaded for smoking tobacco because it was considered a bad thing.
And it's very popular there now.
Right. It's very popular now. In fact, there's stories now seeing, I was reading that there were women smoking, just along the curb, people would see the women just smoking just as much as the men, and it's a huge popular thing now.
Right. Yep.
And in Russia and Austria, you could actually be fined, jailed, or even tortured for smoking it. Because, they wanted to really limit that.
It's just like any vice, gambling, prostitution, drunkenness,
But people want to control also that which people want. So especially the church, if you can control people's desires, that gives you power over them. So.
Power over them in a money making concern
Right.
too.
And in 1614, Jamestown actually shipped its first shipment to England, which is interesting enough. And by 1624, they had shipped 20,000 pounds to England, and in a few years later, in 1638, it was 3 million pounds.
Wow.
So it became quite the commodity.
Very quickly became very popular.
That's almost impossible to imagine that. 3 million pounds.
Yeah, and by the 1680s, Jamestown was producing 25 million pounds of tobacco per year.
That's just in the Jamestown.
So you can see how much money that it was gaining. It was huge amount. So you can see the value that it would have. Ship captains would sail down and hit all these plantations and load up. Now, what they would do with tobacco is it's quite a process to get tobacco. They would lay it underneath straw to call sweating is what they call it, until it turned from the normal color to the brownish color, and then they would hang it and make sure it didn't get moldy, and then they'd put it in barrels. They'd put it in this twist it all up, and then put it into a ball and stick it into a cask or barrel, hogshead, which is a measurement, and ship that off. And you had to have it perfect because it could mold. And during the rainy season, or if it rained, it'd be really bad. So you have all these big, huge tobacco warehouses that they would actually sometimes lay it out to try and process it because they wanted the perfect tobacco.
And at the same time, if it was too dry, then it would lose all of its flavor and nobody would want it.
And it would crumble.
Right. Exactly. So twisting it into ropes or braids, they'd call them sometimes, or coils, and then they'd wrap it up and put it in the hogshead. That was a very common way of preparing it. Because if you did it loose, it would dry or it would mold. Another way that they would sometimes do it would be to press it, and they would stack the leaves on top of each other to a good size, and then they would press them down to the weight.
Right, and then wrap it up in canvas.
Right, and so you keep it under that weight till get all the air out that you can, and then it would help to keep the moisture just right. You wrap it in canvas, and sometimes they would use canvas that was then painted with beeswax or something like that to keep the moisture content just exactly what you want it to be, and put that in a hogshead or a barrel and ship it that way. So those are the most common ways that you would find tobacco in those days, was either in the pressed cakes, which they would call a plug, or in the ropes, which were also very common.
Right. Yeah, you can see why it was quite the commodity when you're selling that much to Europe. It had a great value. It was actually considered a gold.
Yeah.
I think they called it brown gold or something like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Well, I have an anecdote about tobacco that's interesting now. Some people of pirate history might know that when Sam Bellamy sailed north to visit his love there along the Connecticut coast of Massachusetts area, well, he crashed his ship, the Ouida, into the ocean there and spilled all his people out. Now, a few of his sailors survived, and they were taken prisoner then and brought into Boston, where they were hanged. Now, Sam Bellamy, of course, was a protege of Ed Thatcher, or Blackbeard as we know him, Ed Teach or Ed Thatch or what you want to call him. Now they were quite close, almost like a father-son relationship, or maybe older brother, younger brother. And Ed Thatch then claimed that he would harm anyone from Boston, and he would take a Boston ship and he would ruin the sea captains financially any way he possibly could. And then sailing north then, as he did along the Carolinas, now he came across a ship that was out of Boston. And you could do certain things, or you could sink a ship, you could shoot holes in it, you could take the crew, but what he chose to do was dump all of their tobacco overboard. And he did this because he knew that would ruin every man who had invested in tobacco, because it truly was worth its weight in gold. And people would take their entire incomes and they would put it into bales of tobacco, knowing that the tobacco would go to England and they would have a 10 or a 50 or 100 times return on tobacco, because it truly was brown gold. And by dumping it over the side, he knew he would ruin financially anybody who had invested in that concern aboard that ship. And this he did several times. And it's quite an interesting thing that back then they knew enough about economics to know that we're going to take this stuff and dump it, and I'll let them have their ship back, but I'm going to dump all their tobacco and financially ruin them, where they'll never be able to recover. And that was his revenge. Very interesting. Ed Thatch, of course, quite a bit there in the head.
It's quite brilliant.
Yes.
If you remember the episode that we had about fraud on the high seas.
Yeah, fraud.
And the
Yeah, insurance
possibilities
fraud.
of
Yeah,
that.
another thing there.
Yeah. So if you were a sailor back in that day, you would probably be a smoker of tobacco. That would be the most common way, would be to smoke it in a pipe. It was also used in a chewing form, where you'd put it in your gum. But that was mostly used on the frontier, where if you lived on the plains, then you might do it that way, because you might not always be able to light up a pipe and smoke if you're working on the plains there. But on a ship, it was mostly smoking it in the pipe. Now, smoking on a ship had its own problems, though, because ships are extremely flammable.
Right.
They're made of wood and rope and sailcloth and tar on everything to waterproof it. And you've got gunpowder and whale oil for your lamps and things like that. So smoking below deck, any kind of open flame source below deck, was pretty much universally taboo. You wouldn't have it. So if you were on a ship, then generally they would have a time that the bosun would call for smoking. And at that time, everybody would gather on after the ship. Yep, smoke break.
The smoking lamp is lit, is what they would say.
Exactly.
Yep.
And it wouldn't just be the crew; it'd usually be even the officers. The captain would probably take part. And the reason for this was because it was a social activity. Everybody would be equals when you're smoking your pipe together, sharing tobacco with each other, and handing around the glowing ember or the burning stick or whatever you'd be using to light up your pipe with. And there'd be gossip and talk, and it'd be a good time for the captain to kind of gauge the crew's morale and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that was something that was almost universal. I mean, I'm sure there were sailors who didn't care for it and didn't participate, but it was very commonly done.
Now, another thing about tobacco is it actually was the cause of slavery. Because in Jamestown, they found, that nobody wanted it. It was very hard labor. So that's when the importation of the Africans to start harvesting it. So actually, it was a very critical thing on the bringing up in slavery in the New World.
That'd be true.
So another vice to it.
Vice to
not only was it unhealthy for you, very addictive, but it brought about slavery.
That's something else.
That's
there.
true.
The human cargo. Yar.
So I did bring, this would be a smoking kit, just to show how this would work. Now, most sailors would have their smoking kit in like a leather pouch or something like that they could carry with them. But if you were a captain, you might keep a nice box like this.
It looks nice.
Now, a lot of times you would have a pipe that might be made of like a clay
pipe or something
wood,
like that. And this box was given to me by a friend of the show, Lisa. Shout out to her.
Oh, Lisa Hawk. Shout out to you.
Indeed. And I thought it would make a nice demonstration for this
Look
box.
at that.
So in here we have the accoutrements. So we have two pipes that I thought would be interesting to show. So this, what that there is,
the
that is corn cob pipe.
Look at that.
Made famous by Douglas MacArthur, but far from this time.
Right, and that'd be just a regular section of corn cob pipe. And the virtues of a corn cob pipe be that they're very cheap. You could make your own. It's something that would just usually get thrown out, and it worked just fine. You just hollow it out and put it in a stem, and you've got yourself a nice pipe. So when it got worn out, you just throw it overboard.
Get another one,
Make yourself a new one.
That's very nice.
And this is a nicer one. Scarlet Raven was talking about a clay pipe. This is
look at that. That's
an
nice.
officer's pipe here.
Yeah,
It's got a
clay pipe.
little sailor captain carved into it
it's
there.
definitely an officer's pipe.
Yeah, very, very ornate there. Now, a lot of your pipes were just a little clay thing that came down
Yeah,
and
simple-
around.
simple
You see
white
guys
thing.
sticking them in their hats, pirate hats, and I've actually thought about getting one for mine.
True.
You know, I don't smoke a pipe, but
Right.
it's just kind of an interesting accoutrement and fits really well into the
Exactly.
pirate
Fits with the,
environment.
Fits with the whole thing, yeah. And usually they'd be much simpler because they'd be very inexpensive. If you, the problem with the clay pipe is that it can break quite easily.
Right.
Oh, sure.
But because they were fairly inexpensive, well, you weren't out too much if it broke.
Yeah.
So we'll set that there. And you'd have your pipe tool. That's what this is here. It's got a little scoop on one end.
Oh, look at that.
That's for cleaning out the.
Scooping the bowl out.
that
Scooping the
tobacco
tar
out
out.
there, dump it out.
Yeah, smoking tobacco then it leaves a little bit of tar and
Residue.
stuff and residue in the bottom that you got to
Exactly.
clean out because you
Ash and
don't want
whatever
to.
else.
Yeah, a little pick for really
Ash out.
kind of digging it out of the thing there. And this would be a temper here because when you're loading your pipe, you need to kind of tamp the tobacco down.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
That's what that'd be good for.
And then some people use their finger or something, but if you're
Right.
more sophisticated, you would have a
You'd have a
tool to
tamper.
use.
Well, and also sometimes when you light it, the tobacco would expand out the top, and you need to tamp it back down. You don't want to use your finger for that unless you've got good calluses on it.
Yeah, it's true.
So that's what that would be for.
Ooh.
And generally, so and we were talking about the tar. That's what you have these pipe cleaners here for.
Oh yeah, you do clean the stem out there.
And that'd be just some linen fibers there twisted in a
On a
pipe.
piece of wire, yes.
Yep.
Or
There
a
you go.
piece of
Pipe
wire,
cleaner.
exactly.
Sure.
Now, I don't know how, if they had things like that in the 16th or 17th century, but
Sure.
they may have something similar that they would
Sure.
run through.
Well, I would bet they had something. I mean,
Yeah.
you
Right.
don't want to throw away a pipe that you bought.
No,
You
need
must
to
have ran a
keep it
wire
clean.
through it or
If
some
you-
kind of a stick
right.
or
If
something.
you
to
didn't
clean
use
it
your
out.
cleaner, because it was not that much different than what you'd use to clean out a gun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
And so this is just on a smaller scale for
Yeah.
your pipe.
Yeah.
And you'd need to clean it, or you'd get the goo and the tar in there would start to bubble and make problems, and so you need
Yeah.
to clean that out.
There you go.
Generally, and here's one more. I'll talk about these a little bit. So this is a lighter. We'll get to that in a bit. This is a piece of paper. If you were smoking a pipe, you'd want to have a nice piece of paper to lay down, because when you load your pipe, you're going to spill tobacco, and this way you could just kind
You
of
don't waste any
pour
of
it
it.
back in and not
Yeah,
waste
it's
any of it.
brown gold, folks. You didn't want to waste any of
No.
it.
So usually to light your pipe, you would not want to use an open flame on deck because it would be windy and it would blow out your flame. So you'd use like a glowing cinder or something like that. And some enterprising pirates or sailors somewhere decided that this would be a good way to light your pipe. This is called a rope lighter, and it has no fuel, no alcohol or oil in it. The fuel is the rope itself. And generally it would just be the pipe, this little metal cap, and a section of rope. And this is a little bit more sophisticated because it has the flint and the striker built into it.
Oh yeah, look at that.
And so what you would do is you'd see how the top of it is kind of charred there.
Right.
Without the char, it won't take a cinder. It won't smoke. It won't light.
Won't
Then
smolder.
you just throw some sparks on it, and you can see it starting to
Oh yeah, look at that.
blow there.
There it goes.
There it goes. Blow on it there. There you go, folks. A live ember.
And you can use that light ember there, and the wind's not going to blow that out. The harder the wind blows, well, the hotter your
Yeah, the more
It's
it
like
glows.
starting a fire.
exactly.
Yeah, the more it glows there when you get it going.
And then to put it out, you just pull the rope back in, and the cap will then
Which has a
extinguish it.
secondary use if you needed to start a fire.
Exactly.
Well, it'd be useful for starting a fire, lighting a fuse, on something, or lighting a fuse on an old matchlock
you-
gun,
right, matchlock.
or lighting a pipe. It's very
Exactly.
useful from almost anything.
And
lighting
because it-
I can't think of the name of it for your cannon. Your
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 fuse,
fuse.
yeah, your fuse. They had another name for it, but I
Aye.
can't
a
think.
ham bone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, your ham bone.
Because it extinguishes it as soon as you pull that in there. And
Right, you take
This is
away
just
the oxygen.
ingenious how they had it here. It's just a little wire hook to
Yeah.
pull the rope out, and then when you pull it back, it just caps it off, and that just extinguishes it, so it's immediately cold, and you can just put it back in your kit or in your pocket.
That was very smart. Well, it's very clever too.
Yeah.
You had to just be so careful of live embers aboard ship.
Indeed.
One of the problems is the storage of gunpowder for the guns. The constant motion of the ship going back and forth like that would actually cause the gunpowder granules to grind against themselves like that. And they
And
would
you
create a
dust.
super fine dust
Yeah.
that was a pure mixture of powder, and it would seep through the canvas and linen bags and settle down on the floor of the magazine.
Right, which in a fight if they hit it just right, would cause
It'd
the
blow
ship
the
to
whole
just
thing up.
explode.
It
You know,
would
whether they
explode,
hit whether they hit the powder magazine or they hit that dust.
Yeah.
Yar. And that's why all of your lanterns would have to be behind
Yeah, enclosed in glass.
glass like that, so
Yep.
that there's no ignition source. So the tobacco would be, as we were talking about, in plugs usually or in ropes.
Mm-hmm.
And to put it in your pipe, what you would do is you'd slice off a thin slice of it. And if you're slicing it off of the rope, then you'd slice it into what's called a coin. And if it's slicing it off of a plug,
Be
then it's
rounded
called a flake.
Right. Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Just a little coin.
you'd rub it down, and then you would have this. This is loose leaf tobacco here for smoking.
Right
a
now,
pipe.
tobacco this day, a lot of time, our time, they flavor
Oh,
a
look
lot
at
of
that
it.
smell.
Now, I
It's
don't
got a lot
know
of
if they
flavor
really
in it.
flavored it a lot.
They
back
probably
then.
didn't flavor it much. They might have flavored it with some liquors, so
Right.
rum or bourbon or brandy or something like that. Or
Something to
port
keep
wine.
it from drying out. Probably.
It would give it some moisture, and very often they would spray it before pressing it with a little bit of alcohol or water with some sugar in it to kind of help it stick together, and that would help it stay in a cake. If you put
okay.
too much sugar or something like that, and then it would give it an acrid smoke. It would burn hot and kind of burn your tongue.
That has a very sweet smell to it,
Very sweet smell.
which you can, some of the rums that we've had in the past have that
Very similar smell.
smell and even
Right.
that taste. You can almost taste it by the
Yeah,
smell.
yeah. We just did the one, the 1888
Right.
from Dominica, that almost had kind of a tobacco-y.
Tobacco.
And then of course there was the
aroma.
Parse rum we did quite a long time ago.
Yeah, it was the Vizcaya. It was from
it was,
Colombia.
it was called Parse.
It was called part. Yeah, it was from Colombia,
Yes.
and it had a very. In fact, they even said it had some notes of tobacco. And as
It
you
did.
drank it, it was very tobacco-y. Not so much in a pleasurable sense because it was almost like chewing on a plug of Red Man, but it was very apparent.
Huh.
That's really interesting, Captain Turner. It's got a quite earthy. It's got a very earthy, leathery smell.
Yeah,
You know?
it's like leathery vanilla and almost like honey.
Yeah. You know, you can imagine that. It's funny about tobacco. Yeah, but so there's got to be something very primal about the smell that attracts people to it.
I think that'd be true.
And, the earthiness of it.
Right.
So I brought a piece here of raw leather. And when you smell the raw leather, it's got like that earthy sort of fresh, very engaging smell.
Yeah.
in
Especially when
it.
you smell the fleshy side here. Where
You can really smell it, and it's got to be part of the
Tannins
same
and-
thing
Right.
with tobacco.
And when leather gets wet, it even has even more.
stronger, right?
It's very pungent, And
It
it's
actually
almost
smells
like
kind of
this-
good to me.
Well, yeah, of course it's got a good smell, but the tobacco itself has that kind of earthy smell to it.
Well, and that makes sense when you think about it, because the leather is tanned with tannins which come from plants, and the tobacco has probably got quite a few of those tannins in with it.
Right.
It probably does, like the tannic acid and stuff in tobacco probably is the same sort of some acid that they use to break down leather, make it softer. It's really kind of amazing that something so bad for you
Right.
would be so primal. It's got that urge to use it, and then of course it's become so addictive. Then
Right.
it's
Of
like
course.
What's kind of interesting though is pipe smoking. That odor has a much different smell than say a modern cigarette.
Right.
Which
Cigarettes have a lot of additives in them.
Right.
oh yes,
They're,
a lot of
they're
chemicals,
much more.
formaldehyde.
Now we're not
and
saying
other things.
that pipe tobacco or pipe smoking is good for you. It's not, but it's not nearly as bad for you as today's modern cigarettes.
Not that we're trying to preach to you.
No, not trying to preach. Partly because of the additives in the cigarettes, but also partly because of the way that cigarettes are smoked is quite different. Most people who smoke pipes, they smoke maybe a couple of times a week, whereas people who smoke cigarettes, usually they're smoking multiple cigarettes every day.
It's
And
like a pack a day.
exactly. And pipes, most people who smoke pipes, they kind of just puff it in their mouth to get the flavor. They don't breathe it in their lungs so much, whereas the cigarettes, you usually inhale it right in your lungs where it can do a lot of damage.
Now, one thing we didn't really hit upon was the tobacco. One reason why people like it is it kind of gave them kind of a euphoric feel
Oh,
to it,
yes,
kind of
yes.
dizzy even,
yeah.
and very euphoric. And it's kind of like cannabis, which we were kind of going to hit a little bit upon. Cannabis
Right.
was kind of the same way, give you that euphoric feel and mellowness. And tobacco is the same, but it's not quite as
Not as pronounced.
right.
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that nicotine is a drug, of course, and it's a stimulant, and it does a lot of things. It stimulates brain activity, stimulates the heart, it closes down blood vessels, and so it speeds you up in a little ways. And my mother would tell me, she was a nurse for a very, very long time, and she would say they had a thing called medicated cigarettes that they would give people who suffered from depression. And what these would do, they were cigarettes that had 3 or 4 times the regular nicotine content of another cigarette. And people, especially soldiers who had fought in the wars, were suffering from serious depression. They understood it as being a chemical imbalance in the brain. They would smoke these cigarettes, and the nicotine would jumpstart their brains and get their brains working, and they would become almost manic. But they would become very agitated and excited, which was much better than them being coma, like a zombie. Their brain just shut down. And they would medicated cigarettes, and they would smoke these things. And nicotine, it's funny that something so harmful can also, it probably has medicinal qualities. And even back then, they realized that it was quite a stimulant.
Well, that's true of a lot of substances that we use. I mean, you could say the same kind of thing about alcohol.
True.
It has legitimate uses, but it can be addictive, and
Sure.
it's certainly not good for you to drink in excess. But,
Well, yeah.
but a lot of the medicines that are life-saving, if you don't use them properly, can be extremely dangerous.
That's
Right,
true.
in this day and age, we know that like medical marijuana,
Right.
which is, can have its benefits, it can have its downfalls too. But
Oh, yeah.
whether you have a pain that you have to deal with, or you have a mental problem that you have to deal with, and it's a good thing for that, as long as it's moderated and not used in excess. It's
Right.
like anything, moderation. We come on here at the Pirate Round, and you see us doing lots of drinks. We always say drink responsibly.
Absolutely.
Because, and I would say the same thing, if you're going to smoke, is smoke responsibly.
Right.
Sure.
It's an expensive habit nowadays.
Right.
Somebody smoking a pack of cigarettes a day it could be quite expensive, but then again, going out and buying a 12-pack of beer and drinking that at night can be expensive too. So,
True.
Moderation is the thing, and I think even in the day of the 1700s, 1600s, even moderation was still they drank a lot, they smoked tobacco a lot, but a lot of it was still moderation, and the governments went so far as to start taxing it heavily. To try and prevent the moderation.
You want to get money from something,
Right.
Well, they would tax food, they would tax doorways, they would tax windows, they would tax tea, they would tax anything they could to get money, from people. So yeah.
Well, and the fact that it was so expensive helped to moderate it as well. If you were a humble sailor, you probably couldn't afford to just waste it all.
Right,
Yeah, true,
right.
true.
Now, up into the 17th and 18th centuries, tobacco continued to be a cash crop for the Virginias and the Carolinas, and even into Tennessee. Large warehouses, and even today it's still a pretty good cash crop.
Yeah,
Right.
It's not as popular as it has been, but it's still there.
Right.
True,
Yeah.
true.
And other countries are now producing it.
Yep. And there's the thing that Captain Turner's talked about this difference here in this loose pipe tobacco, and you talk about the difference between this and like cigarettes. So much has been added to cigarettes to make them purposely addictive and dangerous to people, with all the formaldehydes and acids, and they said there's 174 other ingredients in it that has nothing to do with tobacco at all.
Right.
Right.
And then the fiberglass filter that you smoke through and stuff like that. You can imagine someone, a sailor, taking a sprig of this tobacco there and tamping it down in his pipe and passing around a low, and kind of like a hobbit.
There's
Right.
the image of the fisherman.
Yeah, the fisherman with
the
his
New
pipe,
England fisherman with his pipe. And
know.
he's got his raincoat and he's got his pipe. He's this big burly guy and he's got this pipe hanging down, kind of like the one Captain Turner's got.
Sure.
And he's clamping on it, and he's got a great story. And Tolkien.
Yeah,
Right.
Tolkien, he enjoyed his
which kind of off subject there, but
Sherlock Holmes, he enjoyed his meerschaum, and you can imagine him lighting it up and enjoying the mental stimulation
Right.
that the nicotine gave him.
And there's a relaxing process about loading the pipe and tamping it down and lighting it and smoking, especially if you're doing it in a circle of your friends and your crewmates, and it's just a ritual that would help you to kind of unwind and relax.
Right, and you got this, professor. You got the guy who takes his. Well, let me think here. He takes his pipe and he.
Right.
Yeah, and he's kind of sitting back.
He's sitting back and he's like, well, so let me tell you. Here's what I think, and and he's chomping down on his pipe, and he's got the.
If you don't have a beard that you can, stroke.
Or the
You gotta have a
mustache.
pipe,
One other interesting thing I wanted to hit it about tobacco was when they produced it in the Carolinas, they figured that the soil was too powerful, was too strong by by planting the tobacco actually leached out a lot of those bad things so they
Right.
could plant the other things.
Right.
Now, how true is that? You know, it's what they believed.
Right. Exactly.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Then moderate the soil.
Right.
It would be a way of cleansing the soil in making it right and proper then for food crops.
Yeah.
Right.
After
Now,
you run some tobacco through it.
right now, having grown up in a farming family, you know, it was very. What you would do is you would rotate your fields,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
and
like crop
you know
rotation.
we do that nowadays because it helps the soil regain a lot of the nutrients that it needs.
True.
You know, you disc in the old and let it kind of build back up, kind of like what you do with you know, maybe taking old things and putting it into a barrel and making a
Compost.
A compost.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
makes it revitalizes the land, and the tobacco would take a lot of the strong alkali or whatever out of it. Not that it was alkali because things don't really grow in alkali, but it would weaken it down so you could grow other things more efficiently. At least that's what they believed. And
Well, I know there's similar things with like soy, which will bring nitrogen back into the soil, as opposed to other crops which will pull the nitrogen out.
right, your
So-
wheats and your corns and
strip it
barleys
out,
and things
yeah.
will strip.
Right.
Cottons all strip out.
Yeah.
So that's why you do crop rotation. You know, every year, every couple of years,
Yeah.
to not over, because if you keep planting in the same field, pretty soon you're going to have a piece of land that's not going to grow shite on it.
Well,
Right.
that's true.
Right.
And Captain Turner hit upon something very important there when he talked about the ritual of packing the pipe and smoking it. Those of us of Native American extraction understand that when they would take the pipe and they would light it and pass it about, and they would take it and they would blow the spirit, you know, they would blow the smoke out, and they would see the smoke rising. They thought they were actually blowing the wish or an idea or a reason up into where the Great Spirit lived, into the sky.
Right.
And that was a way of communicating to the spirit world. And so tobacco was so powerful and so valuable to them because they considered it a way to communicate with the spirit realm. You know, and if you see an ephemeral smoke cloud going up, you can see all sorts of things in it. You know, horse,
Once again,
a
in
river.
the Tolkien Lord of the Rings and stuff with Gandalf, you know.
Yeah,
Once
with his
again,
pipe
piracy,
too.
but you know
Right.
the imagery there.
Exactly, and that sort of interest. But you can get an idea of how important tobacco was to people back then.
Indeed.
And it was something more than just a commodity or something more than a crop. Well, it must have been a way of life.
Right,
Right.
now in Jamestown, once again, you know, Jamestown is kind of the focal point of a lot of the Americas. They didn't have golds and silvers and things like that, so they actually started trading back and forth with the natives their tobacco. So it was a high commodity for them to trade with the natives, you know, valuable things that they might need.
True.
And you know, you can understand why it became a cash crop to them.
Certainly.
And you know, once again, the natives would use it for ceremonies, for peace treaties and things like that. It wasn't something to be taken lightly. It was something that they used for, you know, for ceremonies and
Oh,
things.
certainly, yeah.
Exactly.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and you touched a little bit about how marijuana will also give you that kind of a high
Euphoric, yes.
euphoric, and they did also they did use marijuana and grow marijuana, and it was a very important cash crop. But it was more important as a cash crop for the hemp that they would grow.
Right, hemp
Yeah.
was extremely important because of the rope,
The
and,
rope.
and even
Yeah, the
cloth.
fibers.
Right.
Right, now
The
hemp,
rope and cloth and paper.
And
Right,
paper
hemp
and
today-
the seeds for animal feed too.
right,
Yeah.
hemp today is actually a very miracle plant because you can use it for fuel, you can use it for paper, you can use it for clothing, you can actually use it for food. And 1 acre of hemp actually produces more paper in it than a forest of trees.
Exactly.
So, you know, it's high value, and hemp is a mild form of cannabis
Right.
related to the marijuana plant.
Right.
And it, you know, it has mild HTC,
Right.
but you know, that's not the real use
THC.
for hemp.
And back then they didn't have as many varieties.
THC.
And back then they didn't have all the varieties with more THC. They didn't really know about
Right.
CBD and that kind of thing. It was just you had your hemp, and if
Yeah.
you smoked this part of it, then you would feel a little different. And I know that Thomas Jefferson wrote about how he enjoyed sitting on his porch and smoking marijuana, and so it was.
Yeah.
I hemp or whatever they called it back then. I don't
Yeah.
remember exactly what he referred to it as. But it was something that was definitely used for that purpose, but it wasn't nearly as popular for that purpose as tobacco was.
Yeah, true. True.
So it's, hemp today, it's like the tobacco of then. It's a
Right.
big, huge cash crop.
Yeah.
Fuel. Like I
Right.
said, that's a big thing, to be using it for fuel,
oils
to
that
be
you get
using
from
it for clothing instead of just cotton or wool or polyester, which is, made from oil, which, is a pollutant anyway.
Right.
And it's not bad. It's great value. In the place that the captains and I live, we're becoming a huge hemp producer now.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. That's true.
That's right.
So our verdict then of tobacco, I mean, it's got a historical significance that goes back 400 or 500 years. That time, like many things, it has good qualities and bad qualities.
Right.
Highly addictive, but yet also useful in many ways.
Right.
But also, the idea of ritual and having this thing of where, well, I'm going to sit around with my friends, we're going to share a pipe together, we're going to pass it around, talk about things and discuss it. And it's a little bit like alcohol, a little bit like fine rum to do that,
Yeah.
in a sense. So it's probably got very good qualities, but also quite a few bad qualities. It's like a lot of things in life. Would you agree?
I would. Yeah.
Yeah. There you have it, folks. Deep concepts here on the Pirate Round, but also we try to bring out as much history as we can. And I'd like to thank Captain Turner for bringing his smoking kit with his pipe tobacco here.
Thank you. Frank.
And we've done, this is a really good episode, I thought, that we talked in depth about an interesting thing, a trade item here, a maritime trade item.
Right.
Not just all about piracy, but about maritime trade too.
Right. When we knew that Captain Turner was returning, he mentioned, about doing this episode, and I thought, wow, that's a very good episode. And that's something that we had never thought about, and it's a great episode. And the trade items, we'll have to do these with some other ones. But
Do one on spices
tobacco
or
and
something
spices,
like that.
tobacco was a
Sure.
good episode. It's a good lead-off episode to some future ones. So
There you go. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. I know it's a rather long episode, but hopefully you got something out of it. Here at the Pirate Round, we like to talk about various things of nautical history and pirate history. But we do this for you folks so that you'll learn a bit and so you'll enjoy yourselves. And I want to say thank you so much. Stab that subscribe button and hit that like button. And from us here at the Pirate Round, we say smooth sailing to you. Be true, be strong to yourself. And we say thank you, friends. Yar har.
Yar har.
Yar.
Always be yourself. Always be a pirate.
Tobacco is an Indian weed, at morn it is green, cut down at eve. It shows our decay, we are but clay. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. It shows our decay, we are but clay. Think of this when you smoke tobacco.
The pipe that is so lily white, wherein so many take delight, is broke at a touch, man's life is such. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. He's broke at a touch, man's life is such. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. The pipe that is so foul within doth show man's life is stained with sin. And then the fire it doth require. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. And then the fire it doth require. Think of this when you smoke tobacco.
The smoke that doth so high ascend, it shows man's life must have an end. The vapor's gone, man's life is done. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. The vapor's gone, man's life is done. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. The ashes that are left behind do serve to put us all in mind, that unto dust return we must. Think of this when you smoke tobacco.